I'm Jordan.
And I'm Rosanna.
And on this podcast, we explore how to take life off autopilot
and relentlessly pursue a life worth living together. Hello, and welcome to Season 6, Episode 12 of the Relentless Pursuit podcast, The Loop of Insanity, where the game is made up and the points don't matter.
You were waiting to say that.
I have been waiting to say that, yes. So while it may be the last episode of Season 6, the 12th episode, we are all the way up to 74 episodes together. Who would have thought?
Yay.
But no matter what we talk about on the podcast, from marriage, family life, kids, goals, finances, sex, whatever it is, it all kind of comes back to this notion of taking life off autopilot and being intentional about how you live. Because when we don't, we might just find that when we kind of coast through life, we might not be content in who we are or how we're living. So that kind of breeds this whole episode of The Loop of Insanity.
Right. And in some ways, we encourage you, if you haven't listened to the rest of Season 6 yet, this episode, as a capstone to Season 6, is meant to tie a lot of what we covered in the season together. It really relates to the whole podcast in total. But this episode in particular, we think as we talk about autopilot, we kind of get into that territory where it's like, how can we open our eyes to what's not working for us? So as I was preparing for this particular episode, I was reminded of a little bit of dad wisdom. My dad he's a curious fellow, and he has a lot of, dad-isms growing up. And so I remember several of these, especially as I get deeper and deeper into fatherhood myself. But, one quote of his was, he used to always say, if you always do what you always did, then you always get what you always got.
Write that down.
I'm sure he got that from somewhere. But he said that often, and I don't remember him saying it about anything in particular.
He was just proud that
he would say it. Right. I'm sure there were specific applications for it. But I that's stuck with me, and that's really what this particular episode is about, is this idea that as we look at what features of our life are autopilot, but not being happy with the outcome, then doing something different. And that's really what we'll get into a little bit, but we call this the loop of insanity. I actually, I thought of that phrase, and I'm like, oh, that's a really good phrase. And then I started Googling it. I'm like, oh, other people have used that phrase too.
But, you thought you were a genius for a moment?
Well, maybe that adds to the validity of it, and that a lot of us feel the same way, where we keep doing the same thing, we keep getting the same results, and we're unhappy with those results. So what are we supposed to end up doing then? Well, we need to change something. Right, so I think this is the part of the episode where we just quote what many of you are probably thinking already, which is that quote, which is attributed to Einstein, which is that the definition of insanity is repeating the same thing over and over and expecting different results.
Yep.
So we can throw that in there too. So stop doing it. Stop doing it. Is it too early to get into my Groundhogs Day example?
No, but I will remind you that you didn't let me define the word, but that's all right. You do your movie quotes and your movie examples.
Well, do you have a different definition?
No, I don't. No, because that's the definition. That's fine.
Was that your job? Did I steal your thunder?
All right, you could steal my thunder. Go ahead.
Okay. All right, well, let me carry on then. So I hope many of you are familiar with the movie Groundhogs Day. There's some who argue that this is the greatest film of the 20th century. And I think they have a good case for it, because on the surface it's a comedic Bill Murray shenanigan, but as you actually get into some of the fundamental underlying philosophy of it, it's actually there's some depth to the film. So indulge me.
I was going to say, enlighten us.
So those of you who aren't familiar with the film or haven't seen it in a while, Groundhog's Day is about a character played by Bill Murray, who essentially is a reporter, and he is doing a little kind of report about a groundhog, Punxsutawney Phil. And what happens, though, is that he lives out that day, February 2nd, in this small town in Pennsylvania. But then when he goes to sleep, he wakes up the next day, but it's not actually the next day. He actually relives Groundhog's Day a second time, and then a third time, and then he actually ends up reliving that same day over and over and over again. So he is stuck in a loop. And I think that there's a lot that comes from that. So just going over the film, It's like if you just relive the same day over and over and over again, what do you end up doing? So his character ends up just like trying to find meaning, trying to make sense of this. And he begins the story as a relatively like cynical, self-serving kind of character. So that's where he begins in this loop as well, too. He pursues selfishness. He pursues hedonism. He's like getting drunk and smoking, and he's pursuing women. He is delusional. He thinks he's God at one point. There's just extreme boredom. There's madness. He's suicidal. There's nihilism. I mean, so he like really sinks into the depths of human despair, and he cannot escape this. And, as you look at that, like the metaphor doesn't strike a lot of people because we're just enjoying the film so much. But in a lot of ways, this is our life. Just on repeat, reliving the same day over and over again. And when we do that, where do our emotions lead us? A lot of the same places that he explores. We pursue, something that's superficial. We end up getting like bored or just descending into madness or meaninglessness. And it's really a sad existence.
It reminds me of that song where it's like, everybody's working for the weekend, right? It's like you're waking up, hitting the alarm, hitting the snooze every morning, getting up at the same time, doing the same thing to like hopefully fast forward to like Friday at 5:00 so that you can enjoy 48 hours of Saturday and Sunday.
And what are you even doing on the weekend that is so meaningful?
You're just not at work.
Yeah.
So, it, begs the question and gets you to kind of consider, like, what am I doing with my days? What am I doing with my life? If I dread Monday through Friday from, 6 a.m. until Friday at 5 p.m., like, obviously we're doing something wrong, right? Because we shouldn't hate it. And like, yeah, we all have work and responsibilities and kids and we have a variety of things that are going on. But if you're not present and enjoying the life that you're living, there are some bigger questions that you got to start asking yourself.
And so you're taking it to the macro level too, which I think is important because if we do feel similar feelings of unhappiness or despair, then it may be hard to pinpoint the more concrete aspects of our life. So I think where we want to get to is maybe looking at the micro, which is a little bit more tangible. And I think that leads into the macro too, which is like what portions of our life are kind of on repeat, and they just are, but we're not happy with the results of it. And Groundhog Day, Rosanna laughed at my notes, everybody, because of all of the things that I prepared for today's conversation. I did like the most research on Groundhog Day.
The most thorough investigation of the topics
of
Groundhog Day.
I read critical analyses of the movie itself, but you should definitely watch Groundhog's Day. Other similar films that you might be familiar with that have a similar message are It's a Wonderful Life, Christmas Carol, and my favorite, Adam Sandler's Click, which all, just like Groundhog's Day, involve some sort of supernatural intervention so that someone can have a like spiritual awakening for themselves.
That's pretty interesting. Do you know that I've actually never seen It's a Wonderful Life?
I've never watched the whole thing. I think if you watch Click, then it's the same movie.
I've seen that. We owned that. We watched it for a long time when we were younger.
Yeah. So checking those out gives you like a digestible like microcosm of maybe what we're talking about and some considerations for ourselves. So don't get caught in a literal loop, but sometimes even if we do wake up and it's the next calendar day, are we really just reliving the same thing and unhappy with aspects of the results?
Something that people say is like life goes by pretty fast. People who are older than us and say like, you're going to turn around and suddenly your kids are grown and you're out of the house and you're kind of wondering like, where did all that time go? Or what did I do with my life? I've been working the same job that I hate all of this time and I can't wait to get out. I can't get to retire. Or, you're younger and you're like, I can't wait to fast forward 40 years to retire. Like, that's not the mentality that we should be having. Like, we have this one beautiful life. So what are we doing? Mm-hmm. And so whether we're looking back or looking forward, like the whole point of it isn't to want to rewind or to want to fast forward. It's to want to be present in where we are at that time.
Right. So really, like, let's think about a few maybe specific areas where we are on repeat, we are in that loop, and we may be dissatisfied with some of the results. So imagine just for a lot of us, sometimes that's just with the way we look or the way we feel physically. What are you doing for yourself regarding just your body? And is it still working for you? What about your mind? Do you continuously feel stressed or busy or overwhelmed or burdened? And what are the ways that you treat your mind? What are the patterns that you have your day or your life organized? And is that working for you? What about your career? Are you on a track that you like and you feel both materially and spiritually fulfilled, or not? Is that still serving you? I think about our relationships, and especially our marriage relationships. How's your marriage going? What are the routines and expectations that are in place? What are the patterns? How's that working for you? Is it time to reconsider the loop that you're in and jump out of it and try something different that might serve you better?
And I think part of when you ask yourself those questions in whatever area of your life you're focusing on, part of it is like this notion of like, we as individuals grow and change. And so what used to work for us at 20 might not be working for us at 30. And what was working for us at 30 might not be working for us at 40. You and I have been together for a long time. We're almost at 16 years. And so, like if you look at our relationship over the course of the 16 years, just that we've been married, even before that, I mean, we've been together, like what we need from each other has changed. And so sometimes I think unless you're like kind of really intentionally thinking about it, you might not even realize that like what you need from your partner changes. And so part of that is acknowledging like, where am I at? Like, what do I need? Right. And then like having that conversation with your spouse about like what you need from them. Cause maybe it's not what I used to need. Mm-hmm. And so if I'm not communicating that to you and you don't know, we're kind of living in this pattern that's not healthy and that's in a loop. We're not going anywhere.
So there's a degree of awareness that needs to come from that too.
Right. And so the point for us is like that we want to grow together and not be stagnant and not just be caught in a loop. I'm picturing, what do they call those roundabouts where you like get in and you can't get out,
Hey kids, there's Big Ben again.
Yeah. Another movie reference. There you go. So, like sometimes you just get stuck and sometimes it's just easier to keep driving around that circle because like you and I then don't have to have a conversation about it. We don't have to challenge each other in it. We don't have to change. And it's easier just to ride the loop, except we're kind of slowly just miserable and not going anywhere.
So that's really the first step that we want to get to. And I'm sure there are like more educated professionals who can break this down for us better. But like there's just that degree of awareness, like where am I unhappy? And maybe that's where I bring up like physicality, because maybe that's the most tangible thing for us. Is like, especially as we get older, we look at ourselves in the mirror. It's like, okay, like what have I been doing in terms of diet and exercise and sleep and hygiene? Do I like the outcome? And if the answer is no, or or well, I used to, but not anymore, right? What's the honest answer to that question? And then consider what's something that we can do to change. Because if you always do what you've always been doing, then the results are just going to continue to be replicated as well.
And so some of that might not apply. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If what you've got going on in your habits and your routines and the way you have things set up are working for you, great. But if it's broke, fix it.
Fix it. Right. So I don't want to say an easy one-step process.
Right. Well, I mean,
fix it.
But the key isn't necessarily
like the
more.
Awareness of it.
This isn't about like adding more things to your to-do list or more things to your life. It's not about like doing more, to reap more rewards. It's more about that we're just critically looking at what we have, and if it's not working, switching it up.
Yeah. So the idea is more like the key word is maybe try rather than more. Because you can, again, just going back to how we look, you can continue to do the same exercise over and over again. And at a certain point, like your body just like doesn't respond to it in quite the same way. So try something different. Doesn't mean you need to exercise more. And maybe the same thing in a marriage relationship too. Like, okay, so we have a certain pattern and maybe that used to work for us, but we've changed, or just the dynamic of our household has changed. So it doesn't mean we necessarily need to spend more time together. We need to spend more money on how we're
right,
just
trips
engaging
and
a
gifts
relationship.
and whatever.
Yeah.
Right. It's about what we're doing with the time that we do have.
Yeah. So let's try something. Or going back to your roundabout reference, instead of going around the same roundabouts or just going up and down the same roads, what happens if you turn right down a street you haven't gone before? Where does that lead? It may not necessarily get you to the destination that you had in mind. Just like trying a new workout routine or new diet or whatever may not necessarily yield the results, but it's certainly better than just repeating the same thing that definitely won't give you the results.
Well, and when you try something new, like it kind of opens your eyes to other possibilities. I'm just thinking about like when I take the kids to the forest preserve, and like when we walk all the trails. And the last couple times, you've pointed this out, like that our son Leo is just that kid was not made for walking on a path.
No.
He's just really curious and inquisitive and just kind of marches to his own beat. So the last time I let him lead, and we went, through all of the wilderness of what is Illinois. But, we ended up in the same spot, but we took a new path to get there, and it kind of opened our eyes, all of us, to the possibilities of what was there. And the dog was with us, and she sniffed. Like, it was just a new experience. So you might even end up at the same place, but how that looks and how that makes you feel might be vastly different.
Mm-hmm. So that's really the first step, is just like evaluating portions of your life and then coming to that awareness. And then as we're getting towards now, like just trying something different. I wouldn't throw everything out. Like I remember from my 6th grade science class, if you want to conduct an experiment, you have your control group, and then you have another group where you change just one variable. And then that way you can tell if that variable, or what result that variable leads to. So you kind of have the same thing with in your life as well. Like, what are the different dynamics that you want to change? And instead of just like throwing everything out and starting everything like new, that can be really difficult. Maybe just try one slightly different thing, see where that leads, and then build off of that if that's leading in the right direction.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about habits and routines as an episode. We talked about the book Atomic Habits here and there. And routines and disciplines can be good for like the fundamentals, right? Having a morning routine, scheduling date nights with your spouse, or even like, the way you make room for sex in your life, adding structure to our lives is important. But sometimes in the sake of trying to make life easier, smoother, and more efficient, in order to free up time to do all the things we say we want to do, there's some drawbacks in that, right? Like when it's always the same. Always the same. Even with eating, always the same. If you never have any kind of variant to any of that, things stop working. Mm-hmm. Your muscles don't respond to the same thing if you're doing the same thing for 5 years. And so, it might be easier to wake up and do everything exactly the same. But if we just change one thing, when we feel stuck, that might yield some big results.
Right. So this is not like a major life overhaul, but it is like just a practical guide towards thinking through how can we really get towards or closer to the results that we want. And yeah, you listed several areas. I read there was a random blog post I came across where a person was talking about their own loop of insanity with dating. And because they were like just going out on date after date after date with different people, always the same outcome. And so that led them to some heavy reevaluating of just their whole approach to it. It was interesting. But I think like, yeah, even an established relationship, like just what are those patterns? You mentioned sex life, which I think is important, like just to change it up. Like let's spice it up. You do the same thing over and over. Even if you love pizza, but if you eat it every day, then eventually it just doesn't become what it used to be. So same thing when it comes to...
Such a Jordan comment. It goes back to pizza.
It's all about sex and pizza. So yeah, that was just one thought that you struck on. So what makes this, what makes it difficult? Like why do we feel prone to getting into those habits and routines that are maybe not serving us as well as we'd like?
Well, I think it's that we're like, why? So essentially you're asking, why don't we leave the loop? Right?
Right.
Like, why don't we
even realize we're in a loop?
That's a great question. I think like that's like something to ask, one of the one of the amazing people we've had on the show that, have some kind of
Right.
degree in that.
At least Bill Murray had the advantage in Groundhog Day of knowing he's in a loop. But can you imagine like doing all of that and not realizing it and still wondering like, why do I feel so awful about these different aspects of my life?
You know what? I think we're designed to be creatures of habit. And so doing the same thing that is comfortable or that's at least known gives us a sense of security. And really, like, if you go back to been listening to someone this week and they're talking about like our primal selves, like ultimately we're always just trying to do everything that we can not to, what did you say, like encounter, but everything not to die. Like, right. You do you do things that, are
We're made to survive.
correct.
We're risk averse.
Correct. And so it's like, okay, like I do this every day and then this yields the result of, not dying, like safe, it's secure, this is what I do. And then that becomes a habit and then there's some comfort. And then the fear to change that holds us back from exiting the loop.
So if we're in something that isn't making our life great, but it's keeping us alive, then we're more prone to stick with that than try something different.
Right. And I think there's, it's like the fear of the unknown of like doing something else and like that uncertainty. Well, what if I do change this and I don't like it? It's like that fear. Or like, what if I have to admit that I failed at something? What if I have to admit that I'm wrong? What if I change it and it's great? Sometimes we're like even, like fear of success, fear of like changing your life. Like, this is what I know. This is what I do. If I do something else, things are going to change. And although that sounds dumb, that's a lot of people. That's most of us. Like, if I am successful at this, I have to level up. I have to try harder. I have to put in more time. I have to put in more energy, right? Like, I start eating well and I lose weight, like then I have to continue to do that. Like it's, it's easier just to sit back and not.
Right. So that's another reason why we don't leave the loop is because maybe it's just easier to be in that.
Like a default.
Yeah. So like changing a habit, it takes a little bit more effort. It's a little bit more challenging.
Yeah.
I also think it's like, okay, you can recognize that you're in a loop and you don't like the current results that you have, but then I think the next barrier is also you just don't know what to do. It's like, okay, I want to look and feel better about myself, or I want to change something about my career, my approach to my industry. And we could sit there and just feel stuck. It's like, yeah, but what are my options? It'd be nice if someone can lay them out and say, pick, door 1, 2, or 3. But it's not like that. We have to, often invent these ourselves and then decide which one to go down.
So, and I feel like I've been there. Can you admit that at some point you've been there? It would be easier for someone just to tell you what to do than for you to figure it out.
Yeah.
And I felt like that in numerous ways. And like, what I've done when I've gotten to the point where I'm just kind of like so sick of like the excuses and not knowing what to do, I've enlisted the help of someone else. Because sometimes I just feel stuck and sometimes I can't just decide. And we can do this from the silliest level with me. And if you know me, you know that if you take me out to a restaurant, I cannot sit there and just pick out one thing on the menu and I'm like stuck, which is just the stupidest thing.
Oh, actually, that comes from the opposite reason, which is the paradox of choice. If you have too many options, then you also feel stuck too, which is a common occurrence at restaurants.
For me, apparently.
For a lot of people, I'm trying to make you feel
For
better.
Someone trying to choose peanut butter at the store,
Yeah, but it'd be nice if you, like, sometimes that could be like a spouse, a friend, or like a trusted associate.
Sure, but like
sometimes it's a coach.
When I felt kind of stuck and ready to change things up, then I joined like a studio gym just to like shake things up, right? I didn't want to have to be in charge of my workouts. I am paying someone else to be in charge of my workouts. You tell me what to do and I will do it. Like if you offshoot that to somebody else, sometimes that kind of like frees you up and like pushes you to go to the next level. So same thing with my business. Like I've been creating and developing this for so long. I'm not sure what's next for me. I want someone to kind of like tell me like, am I on the right path? What should I do? What should I avoid? Right? Like, so then you find someone to kind of help you work through that. So, whether it's a business coach, a personal coach, a therapist, a gym trainer, a nutritionist, a friend, like, hey, I'm feeling stuck here. Like, I know you know more than me in this area. Like, how can you help me? Mm-hmm. So I think that's part of it too. Like we think we have to know all of the answers. And I think it's not that we need to know the answers. We just need to know that something is not working, and then we need to seek the answers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes it's even in anticipation of getting in a loop too. Like I think of your business, for example, where I don't feel like you've been stuck, but you could sense that you've reached a point where you can kind of run it as it is and just put that on repeat as many times as you want. But you don't want that. So like enlisting some outside perspective so that you can continue to
Scale, grow, level up.
continue to make it what you want it to be and not get to the point where you're dissatisfied with the results or bored with the results.
Right. Because sometimes you don't know what the next step is.
All right. So we have acknowledging or becoming aware of the fact that we're dissatisfied with the results of certain loops that we're in. And we have the notion of trying something. And when we're not sure what to try, then talking it out with someone who may be able to help guide us, give us some options.
Well, and I think the other point with that try is it's not necessarily just try one thing and it's going to be it. I think for some reason we think we can't try 10 things. And I think about this with like dating. Not that I've really ever had to date or have dated in a long time.
So share from
my vast knowledge of meeting you at 15 and here we are. So like, isn't that the point of dating, right? To date, to enter into a relationship with someone, like just to go out on dates, to have fun, to see if they're your type, right? It's not that like I date you and then like it has to be you for forever. It's like, right? Like,
it could be. I mean, it
was for us, but like, there's also nothing wrong with like trying a bunch of different things until figuring out what you like or what suits you or what works for you. And so, whether it is, a relationship with your partner or, working out at a gym or pursuing something in business, like sometimes we have to try a couple different things. Like it's not just going to work out the first time. It's like trying on clothes in a fitting room. You bring in a whole bunch of different styles, and if you're a woman, probably 4 different sizes to see like which one works for you. And I think a lot of times in life we're afraid to do that. Like we just have to be married to the one thing, and then that's it.
Well, it's right for the reasons we listed. It's safe or it's easy.
Right. It's what's always been. So I think we kind of have to kind of consider that when we look for maybe what the next thing is or what the next answer is. That it's not always going to be the first thing.
Mm-hmm. All right, so really, like I think of this conversation as almost like a pre-summer conversation, because maybe not all listeners, but many of us have just a little bit more opportunity over the summer. Sometimes their schedules are shaken up with work or with kids being out of school, and it's just a chance to, it's kind of a built-in time to shake things up a little bit. So this is almost like a preemptive summer episode to consider what is it that we want to try to identify between now and summertime. And is there an opportunity over summer to try something a little bit different without feeling like we have to now commit to this or now just sign up for a new loop that may or may not be helpful, but just see what other mentalities and what other habits and practices might be out there that can, for this period of our life, serve us.
What I do like about summer is that like the days are a little bit longer, the weather's warmer. There's like, I feel like less excuse to like say like we can't. Like there always seems to be more time. People may work longer days, 4 days a week to have a shorter day on Friday. So like how can you leverage your time? How can you leverage that like feel good, like lightheartedness about summer to be like, you know what? Yeah. Last year you told me going into summer that you were going to try a Brazilian jiu-jitsu class. You went, you signed up, you bought a gi, and you're like, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to shake it up. I'm going to see how this works. And I was very surprised because it was definitely, that was like not you, not the you that I had known for as long as I've known you. So it seemed surprising. It seemed odd. I didn't really understand why. I think it took me a month to even understand what it was that you were actually doing, because I thought you were doing karate or something. But like you kind of knew you were in a little bit of a loop. You needed to like figure it out. And if it didn't work, you weren't going to stick with it. But I mean, lucky for you, you found your like newest obsession. And it's a healthy way for you to like accomplish a lot of things that are like on your list of like who you say you are and what you want to be. Yeah.
But the same rule applies. Like if at a certain point, I just even asking the question and evaluating like, okay, to what extent is this still serving me? Or am I in a loop where I'm not liking the results? And just holding that up to that evaluation, and the moment that it stops, like checking a lot of those boxes, then trying something new, whether it's moving on or just trying an approach to it.
So I think one of the biggest questions that we can leave listeners with in this episode is like, when you're stuck in a loop of insanity, what do you do? Do you withdraw or like continue in the loop, or do you pursue something different? And so I think that's like the biggest question for a person to answer for themselves is like, what do I typically do when I feel stuck? Do I just remain stuck, or do I shift and try and change things up? You know, whether you change your environment or your response to something, like, you know, you kind of have to know like what your default is, and then from there, like, act accordingly.
Yeah. And also be aware of what habits and routines and disciplines are currently serving you, because that, I think, is part of the point. Is like discipline can be a very powerful tool in how you're shaping yourself. And so like committing to those that really are working, but always like asking your
Assessing.
question, yeah, like,
Reassessing.
who do I want to be? Like what outcomes do I want? What are my routines? Oh, well, my routine doesn't match the outcome, so I need to change it now.
Yeah, I mean, it's all about that intentionality and kind of that reflection of what's going on. And so, you know, a lot of people do that like at the end of the year, at the start of the year, but you could reassess quarterly. You could reassess, you know, like, right, maybe your calendar is like summer through October, like whatever your rhythms are, you know, based on your life and your goals and what your family dynamics look like, or where you spend your time. You know, some people who spend part of their time in one place during the year and somewhere else, like, take that all into consideration for like how you're aligning with what you say you want.
So I wanted to take this to, I would say, like the cultural level as well, because we're talking as individuals right now, maybe as couples. But I was just randomly thinking, and this is almost more of a closing thought, like what are as I'm going to slip throws Walden in here a little bit. I don't know if I did that in season 6. I always try to make
It might
sure
be the first one for the season.
a little bit of Walden gets into each season. But, you know, he talks about how, I think he says how deep the ruts of tradition and conformity are at the cultural level. Like, what are the same things that we're just doing as Americans, not as individuals, but just as just culturally over and over, that we can reevaluate, and at least in our role as an individual operating within culture, that we can break. So I think of just over the last couple of years, like there was like a big reconsideration of how were we interacting and providing, you know, equity and justice racially across the United States. I think of consumerism and like what's working for us or not with the way that we treat our money and our materials culturally. What about social media? Is something or anything about that in the way we're choosing to indulge in that or create for that, is that serving us? And really like assessing those habits that not just you as an individual are doing, but we're culturally doing, and kind of coming to that awakening as well of a lot of what we do is because of the shape of our culture, but that's all open for reinterpretation as well.
Yeah, and it also makes me think of like that notion of hustle culture, where we're like working so hard to like achieve so much, but at what cost? We're tired, we're physically and mentally like hurting, we're not enjoying our lives, we're not fully present in front of our children. And so, you know, like even that, like I feel like that's starting to catch up. Like for that was like the norm for so long. And people are even like waking up to this notion of like, what am I even doing this for? Like, I've now achieved this. I have the corner office, except I'm miserable. I'm divorced. My kids hate me. I spend no time out of the office. Like, I don't enjoy like, I don't even use my vacation days. Like, like people are
Because
starting.
you buy into like the lean in culture, and it's like, well, no one told me about leaning out, but but that's important too. Now that's what I
Right.
want to do. Or I even think of just like capitalism in general makes us become like worth what we earn. And so in like a late capitalist culture, like taking a step back from that, being like, well, wait a minute, I'm not worth what I earn. I'm not worth what I have, even if that's a common cultural way of assessing ourselves and how we measure up against others.
Oh, that one was deep. That'll cut deep if you're listening.
All right, so maybe in season 7, we'll explore that a little bit more.
I got nothing.
Okay. Well, I think on that note, your homework assignment is to go watch or rewatch Groundhog Day, and then maybe more intentionally takes a look at, as we've been saying, the loop of insanity, the habits and the practices that are not giving you the results that you wanted any longer, and then just trying something that you think might help you break out of that loop and get you closer to who and what you want to be.
All right. So that is the end of season 6, episode 12.
Yay.
74 episodes.
You know what I'd like to do at the end of season 6? I'd like to take myself over to iTunes and leave a review for my favorite podcast, The Relentless Pursuit. So why don't you all go ahead and do that as well? And take yourselves over to the relentlesspursuitpodcast.com, sign up for our newsletter, and get in touch with us and give us any feedback or any episode recommendations. A lot of our episodes often end up being recommendations from some of our listeners, so we're always open to what you have in mind and what you'd like to hear us explore.
All right. So what can everyone else expect now after this episode? What's our plan here?
Oh, right. That thing at the end of each season. We go dark for about 4 weeks. And we won't have any new episodes in the month of May, but then in June, we'll have a whole new season 7 summer series for you.
Until then, take care of yourself and each other.
Well said. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks so much for listening to today's show. We hope you'll use this conversation as a starting point for your own. We hope you're encouraged to think and act more intentionally.
If you want to learn more, you can visit our website, therelentlesspursuitpodcast.com, where you can find notes on today's show, plus additional blog posts, and you can subscribe to our free members list.
Please subscribe, leave a review, and share with your friends.
Facebook and Instagram are 2 great places to connect with us for daily doses of our quotable quotes, behind the scenes, and real-time photos, videos, and challenges.
Until next time, let us know how you are taking life off autopilot
And relentlessly pursuing what matters.